Welcome to Canada's most irreverent talk show. This is the Andrew Lawton Show, brought to you by True North.
Hello and welcome to you all, Canada's most irreverent talk show here, the Andrew Lawton Show on True North on this Thursday, June 20th. Hope you're having a wonderful, wonderful day as the week nears its natural end. It's going to be hopefully a great weekend up ahead, getting a little bit warm in some parts, although I think there was a report earlier in the week that somewhere had frost or snow, which if you're in Alberta, you're just shrugging, saying this is business as usual. But nevertheless, you don't want too much of a heat wave when the water issues are still as bad as they are over there in Calgary anyway. But I wanted to take a big picture look today at a topic we've been covering on the show for months, certainly for the last couple of weeks, which is the foreign interference issue. And let me be clear when I say that this should be an issue on which there is, as I remarked earlier in the week, unanimity in the political class. The Liberals, the New Democrats, even the Bloc Québécois, although that one's a little bit dicier, should be able to agree in the importance of protecting Canada. The sovereignty of the nation state that is Canada depends on being able to be isolated, as it does for any nation state, from the influence of foreign regimes, specifically those that are hostile to Canada and its interests. But as we've learned through CSIS leaks to the media, most recently through the Parliamentary National Security Committee's report, Canada has not been immune to this. And in fact, some members of Parliament and members of the Senate, parliamentarians broadly, have wittingly, to use the words of the NSI COP report, wittingly collaborated with foreign governments. And if you want to know who those people are, well, you and me both. I've certainly got some suspicions, but the reality is we have not, as Canadians, been given the right to know, because the Prime Minister's office has decided the information should be redacted and will not disclose even which parties have members of Parliament who could be wittingly or even semi-wittingly collaborating with foreign governments. So, like I said, there's lots to delve into here in terms of who's responsible and who's done this and who's done that and who should have done that. But there's a bigger picture aspect to this as well, which is what a nation's obligation is, what a government's obligation is on this, which seems to be a discussion the current government has had very little interest in exploring. I wanted to welcome to the program our old friend Brian Lee Crowley, Managing Director of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, which does tremendous work on issues of a domestic and foreign nature in Canada. Brian, always good to talk to you. Thank you for coming on today.
Andrew, it's always great to be with you on the show.
So let's just begin here with a bit more of a reaction point from you on this. Have you been surprised with all of the work you've done understanding Canada and understanding its place in the world? Have you been surprised by any of this story the more we've learned about it?
Not surprised, Andrew. Deeply disappointed, but surprised could not possibly describe the reaction of anybody who has been following this story, not just for weeks or months, but for years. You know, we at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, for example, have been calling on the government to act on foreign interference allegations for a decade or more, because it has been crystal clear that foreign governments have been actively soliciting not only elected members of the House of Commons and senators, but also members of the bureaucracy, members of the media, pretty much everybody who has any position of influence in Canada, I think, has been in the sights of the Chinese, particularly the Chinese security services, the people charged with spreading Chinese influence throughout the world. And so I'm glad, after years of our sounding the warning at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, that finally the public is seized of this issue, and that the people who are responsible within our political class are finally being embarrassed into at least acknowledging that there's a problem.
You know, there's an old parable that I've heard told a number of different ways. I've heard it as, you know, a scorpion and a squirrel, a scorpion and a rabbit, a snake and a man. But the gist of it is that, you know, one person trusts the snake or the scorpion, who assures them he won't bite them. And then at the end of it, when the person gets bitten or stung, the snake or scorpion says, well, what did you expect? That's what I am. And, you know, I take that to heart when I'm talking about foreign interference. We expect this of China. We expect this to some extent of India. We expect this of places like Iran. We expect this of Russia. So the idea that we should be surprised or blindsided by this in any way, I take your point, is I think an incredibly disappointing one. Yes, we can point fingers at who's doing the foreign interfering, but we should have known they're doing that. We've known for years. We've known since the beginning of the Cold War that foreign interference and infiltration, even in Canada, is an issue. So, yeah, I do look at our lawmakers and say, are you naive or are you collaborators, basically?
Yes, look, I'm a big admirer of the people who put themselves on the line and offer themselves for public office and so on. I think it's a thankless task, and we desperately need people who will do this. That said, we have allowed the reputation of the people in Canada's Parliament to be so tarnished and so sullied that it is now impossible, I think, for us to run fair elections in Canada with the reputation of Parliament being in the kind of tatters in which we find it today. I think for democracy to work properly, people have to have confidence that if they vote for someone, that person will actually represent the interests of both his or her constituents and the interests of Canada. And I think it would be completely normal in the circumstances we find ourselves in today for many people to say, I can't have confidence that that's the case. And because the government will not reveal the names of the people whose reputations have been tainted, there's no way to clear the air, and there's no way to distinguish parliamentarians who are honorable people who have been defending the interests of their constituents and of Canada from those who have not. And I think that's an intolerable position for voters to be in and for parliamentarians to be in.
No, you're very right, Brian. I mean, we could be talking about one person, 5 people, who knows? Because there are degrees of this, there are degrees of complicity. And in the absence of information, we start to view everyone with skepticism. Now, I would say, generally speaking, approaching politicians with skepticism is probably healthy for many reasons, not just this, but it undermines confidence in the system when you're looking at members of Parliament having seen no expulsions from caucus, having seen no leader come out and say, so-and-so is not going to be permitted to stand as a Liberal. It makes us look at everyone and say, ooh, are they one of these people? Are they named in the report? And how is a Canadian supposed to have confidence in the system when we have been kept in the dark so much on something that should be of such importance?
Well, the answer, Andrew, is that people can't have confidence. That's the problem. We now find ourselves in the position where not only the intelligence services of Canada have repeatedly warned Canadians that members of the political class are compromised, but we now have a committee of parliamentarians, including representatives from all the major parties, including the governing party, who have signed on to a report which has explicitly said that parliamentarians have been either witting or unwitting tools of foreign interference by governments that are not friends of Canada. So we now, I think, can be in no doubt that this has happened. Forget about Elizabeth May, who, the media for some reason treat her as some kind of party leader on the same footing as, say, Justin Trudeau or Jagmeet Singh or Pierre Poilievre. That's nonsense. The Greens are not a recognized party in Parliament. She is not an official party leader. The people who know about these things, the parliamentarians who studied these reports, the people who represent the intelligence gathering services of Canada, they have all been telling us that there is a serious problem, that there are specific members of our political class who are compromised. And there can be no doubt that we have to take very seriously the problem of how we clear the air now before an election that is due in roughly 15 months.
I think you're right about that. And the problem is, just to bring it into the political realm for a moment, is that you have this weird situation where, on one hand, one of the core issues in the Canadian political system right now is that we have reason to distrust the integrity of the democratic process. On the other hand, we want to vote out the people responsible for allowing that to happen in an election. And it creates this weird dilemma where, the mechanisms of democracy, which we would need to hold a government that has let this problem balloon to account, are the very things that are at issue.
Well, yes, the whole point is the use of elections to achieve an expression of popular will about the issues facing the country. This has been destroyed because we cannot know in any constituency in the country now, basically. We cannot know whether the people we're voting for, if they're an outgoing MP, whether they are tainted by this foreign interference scandal. Now, look, there are many honorable members of Parliament, and I'm sure that many of us are able to distinguish some of the people that clearly fall outside, that could never be charged with this kind of offense, as opposed to people who are deserving of at least a suspicious look. But the point is, I could have my opinion about that. You could have yours. Every other person will have their opinions about it. But we cannot clear the air. We cannot say definitively yes to this person, no to that person, and that calls the whole democratic institution in Canada into question. And I think that part of the problem is that while the government of the day, the Liberal government of Justin Trudeau, has been pretty unapologetically pro-Chinese, both before it came to office and during its time in office, the fact of the matter is that there are members of several political parties who have been close to China, who believe that Canada's interests lie in a closer relationship with China. And that's a perfectly legitimate point of view to defend. It's not my point of view, but the problem is that potentially every political party is tainted, and it's not clear how Canadian voters should act if they're presented with an election in which these charges hang over Parliament and all the political parties. How can you vote to clean up the mess?
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't know how to advise people.
So moving forward, I mean, there are, I guess, two aspects. Well, there are many aspects of this, but you can look at the structural things of what mechanisms and what laws can we put in place to allow for interference to be dealt with. I spoke to journalist Sam Cooper, who basically said we have this huge gap in the law itself where we don't have the systems intended to deal with this. And then you also have the political side, which is how can we certainly expose it and make this a winnable issue. Now, I've seen a change even on this show. When the foreign interference stuff first came up through the leaks to Global News and the Globe and Mail, we were talking about it, and it was just not capturing the audience in the way that other issues were. And I still talked about it because I thought it was important. That's changed a little bit now, and I think people have had more time to digest it. People have now seen it get worse than they knew it was. And that has caused there to be a bit more attention to it. I still don't know if when push comes to shove in an affordability crisis with cost of living and inflation rampant, if this issue, which to a lot of people can seem abstract, would be the one that moves the needle at the ballot box. What do you think?
Well, I absolutely think that the next election will be fought primarily on economic issues, cost of living, inflation, the burden of taxation, all of these things, because that always looms large in the mind of voters, especially at a time when all of those indicators are uncomfortable for a large number of voters. But the atmospherics around the election, the sense that Canadians have whether voting actually makes a difference for the better, I think we have a real problem there. And like you, I've been talking about this foreign interference issue for years, and I despaired of ever being able to get Canadians to pay attention to these things. One of the issues that we have in Canada is being right next to the United States, knowing that no other country will be able to invade us militarily because America wouldn't tolerate that, and believing that we're nice Canadians and who would want to hurt us. All of these things together have made Canadians very skeptical at the idea that what do you mean some foreign government is actually trying to interfere in our politics? Who would want to do anything bad to Canadians? Well, I think Canadians are starting to understand. There, with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, with Chinese bullying of Taiwan, with all the things that are going on around the world, and the fact that foreign interference is an issue in many countries, Canada can no longer believe that it is insulated from all of these trends which are affecting people all around the world. And I think that's making it something that's really got their attention.
Do you get any sense of how Canada stacks up against other countries in dealing with this?
Well, we're very behindhand. I mean, the UK, Australia, even New Zealand, the United States, which has had a foreign agents registry for years. All of these countries have been made aware of these problems, have had their own scandals. There have been, academics targeted by China because they were the academics were talking about the dangers of cozying up to China. These things have been the subject of controversy now around the world, including amongst many of our major friends and allies. We're late to the game, not because China has been slow to infiltrate Canada. On the contrary, Canada was an early target because China thought we were a soft target. And indeed, why would they not think that? We catch red-handed Chinese scientists at our infectious disease lab in Winnipeg, sending information, classified information, home to China. And basically, we do nothing for 2 years and then let them go home. China looks at this and says, it's open season in Canada. So we have, I think, no one but ourselves to blame. I don't blame the Chinese. The Chinese are busy trying to promote their interests around the world. I blame Canada and our institutions and Canadians generally for having been so complacent for so long that other countries like Australia, like New Zealand, like the UK, like the United States have long since woken up to this problem. And we are very, very late to the game.
It's interesting, too, to give a bit of a history lesson, as I sometimes do on this program. And I apologize, Brian, that you have to bear witness to it in the first place. But, there's a history of this. People may be familiar with what's called the Gazenko Affair, which, goes back to the 1940s. It's, marked as the beginning of the Cold War in Canada. It was a gentleman at the Soviet embassy that wanted to defect to Canada. He had evidence of a Soviet spy ring in Canada that had infiltrated the political class. And he could not get people to take his documents with this seriously. He went to, I forget the order, but he went to the Ottawa police, the RCMP, he went to the media, and everyone just kind of said, oh, yeah, we'll get to it. So this idea of being ignorant to this issue has sadly, a long history in Canada. And I guess I would have hoped that in the 80 years since then, we'd have learned our lesson. But I don't think that's the case, because what have we heard repeatedly throughout the NSI COP and the CSIS leaks is that documents have been put before the government and effectively ignored.
Yes, I will say in the defense of our intelligence service.
True, yeah, they're not the problem. They were the problem then. They're not the problem now. That's a good point.
They are not the problem. And in fact, they have been sounding the alarm for years. And
which is why they leak to the media, which is, the last resort if you're an intelligence official.
I completely agree. You see, I think what's going on is there's a bit of a civil war. And I've written about this before. There's a bit of a civil war going on within the government of Canada between the intelligence services, which have been sounding the alarm for years and getting absolutely no take up by political authorities, and the political authorities basically saying nothing to see here, folks. We don't believe in our own intelligence. And I got to say, Andrew, there's some irony in the fact that this government came to power criticizing the previous government for not having listened to its own civil servants, and the census and various things. They said that government doesn't care about their civil servants who are professional people hired to advise Canada. We must take them seriously. Of course, as soon as the intelligence services started to say, listen, folks, we better start taking Chinese interference seriously. So, there's nothing here to see, and we don't think that the intelligence is any good, and it's only intelligence after all. I mean, the way in which they have consistently tried to dismiss what the specialized agencies designed to protect Canadians from foreign interference have been telling them, I think has been nothing short of shameful. So I think the difference between the Gazenko Affair, which you quite rightly invoke, Andrew, remember that it wasn't just the Cold War starting in Canada. The Gazenko Affair started the Cold War throughout the West, because we were still living in the honeymoon period after Russia or the Soviet Union and the West had defeated Germany in the Second World War. And nobody wanted to believe, literally, that the Soviet Union might be now our enemy rather than our ally. Now, the intelligence services in Canada have known for years that the regime in China does not wish Canada well. They're not our enemy. They are our adversary or our opponent. They are busy pursuing their own interests, and Canada is not busy defending its interests. And that's the message that our own intelligence services have been trying to tell us. So Gazenko, the difference between the post-war period and the Gazenko Affair and today is that Gazenko went to the equivalent of the intelligence services and they turned him away. The intelligence services today have said, my man, you are on the money, and we are going to tell our political authorities, and the political authorities shut them down.
So I wanted to get you to explain, because there is a nuance, but an incredibly important one, between enemy and adversary. And people often have difficulty deciding how to frame Canada's relationship with China. And I was hoping you could just elaborate on that.
Well, look, we are not enemies. We are not at war. What we are is we are different countries with different interests, and we actively pursue those interests. Now, the fact of the matter is that China's interests and Canada's interests are not perfectly aligned. And in fact, we are friends with Taiwan. China is Taiwan's great oppressor and bully. We believe in the freedom of navigation, of the openness of the seas. China is busy establishing its military dominance over the South China Sea in defiance of international law. And we could go on and multiply the examples. The point is that we believe in a certain number of things which are quite different from the ones that the Chinese believe in. And so when we deal with the Chinese, we have to understand that they are not our friend. They have things that we want in terms of economic growth and manufacturing capacity and all the things that we would like to be associated with. But we cannot, in good conscience, I think, forget the fact that our interests are, in many cases, not just not aligned, but actively opposed. And I think about, for example, the Australians, who have a much closer relationship with China than we do. They are much more reliant on China as a market than we are. And yet Australia has been completely direct and unapologetic about defending the interests of Australians and of their nation against the interests of China. And they were early, well ahead of us with foreign agents registry and tightening up of security surveillance of Chinese agents, and et cetera, et cetera. So it is entirely possible to maintain a positive economic relationship with China. I'm not opposed to trading with China. I'm opposed to letting China use its economic strength as a way to get us to forget our interests. And I think it's in that sense that we are opponents or adversaries, but not enemies.
So, as we look at the way forward here, what would you like to see? Because the government, as I talked about earlier in the week in a different episode, loves to play around with when information is privileged and protected and when it's not. They love to play around with when they get to direct law enforcement and when they don't. And they've basically been hiding behind the secrecy of national security without acknowledging the fact that NSI Cop is redacting its reports at the pleasure of the Prime Minister. And, the same power and authority could unredacted. Do you think just releasing the names should be the first step, or is there another path you'd like to see this go?
Well, releasing the names is a very important thing to do, but I think beyond that, if we want to avoid things like this happening again, we can't just release the names of people who've been impugned or tainted in the last few years. We have to bring in or put in place institutions that continuously protect us from this happening again. And to the government's credit, they have brought in legislation creating a foreign agents registry. I think that's a vital step. But I think we need to do even more. One of the weaknesses that's been revealed to us as a result of these reports from our intelligence gathering services, as read and understood by NSICOP, is, for example, the nomination process that we use for our political parties is deeply flawed. It is an open invitation to foreign interference. And that means I don't personally think that the government should be running all the political parties in the country. Don't get me wrong. But I think this is a clarion call to the authorities in every one of our political parties to demonstrate to Canadians that their party is not available to be taken over by forces that are hostile in the interests of Canada. So we need foreign agent registry. We need reform of the political parties. We need to make the intelligence that is gathered by our intelligence agencies more available to a larger part of the decision-making process in Ottawa. At the moment, it's too much under the control of governments that have partisan interests at stake, and we need to spread that responsibility a little bit more across the entire political class. In the United States, if something like this happened, you can be 100% sure that one or the other houses of Congress, perhaps both, would be having public hearings, and this would be a matter of public record. So we need to do everything we can to tear away the veil of secrecy, not over in the intelligence gathering process, that has to be protected, but when things are discovered as a result of the intelligence gathering process that affect the interests of all Canadians and the security and integrity of the sovereignty of Canada, we cannot allow people with a partisan interest in the answer to determine what Canadians will know and when they will know it and what will be protected for security reasons. So I think there is a broad range of things that need to be changed and reformed in order for Canadians to feel safe and to have confidence in their political process.
Brian Lee Crowley, Managing Director at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. Always a pleasure to get your time, certainly, but definitely your insights. For the better for them. So thank you, Brian.
Always a pleasure to talk to you, Andrew. Thank you.
All right, Brian Lee Crowley. That does it for us for today. By the way, I should say, so I use NSI Cop and NSICOP interchangeably because I hear both used. But without a doubt, anytime I use one, the person I interview uses the other. Look, whoever I am interviewing, listen to them because they're right in that moment. Without a doubt, I said NSI cop on this one, and Brian says NSI cop. When I say NSI cop, someone else says NSI cop. I just go with the generic Committee of Parliamentarians on National Security and save it that way. But the two of them are the same thing, regardless of how they're pronounced. Anyway, that does it for us for today. My thanks to all of you, and again to Brian Lee Crowley for coming on the show. We'll be back next week with more of Canada's most irreverent talk show here on True North. Thank you, God bless, and good day to you all.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.